I never thought a rainstorm could change my whole day or my whole perspective on where you might find someone worth talking to. I was just trying to get home after a brutal day at work, already soaked from the sudden downpour, when I spotted that little storefront on 5th Street. It had one of those old-school awnings, the kind that looks like it's been there forever, and I figured it'd be a decent spot to wait out the storm. Not like I had much of a choice. My phone was dead, and the rain was relentless. So there I was, standing under this awning, watching the street get flooded, feeling kind of miserable but also secretly glad for the break. That's when I noticed him. I'm not even sure I was paying attention until I saw him step out from the corner, shaking water off his jacket, eyes scanning for shelter too. He had this calm, almost tired look about him, like the rain had caught him off guard too. But there was something about the way he moved, kind of slow and deliberate, that made me curious instantly. He didn't say anything at first, just stood a few feet away, his face pulled up into a small smile when our eyes met. It was one of those moments, the kind you don't expect at all, where you realize someone else is just as stuck in the same weird little bubble as you. I figured I should say something, break the silence, so I nodded toward the street and said, "Crazy weather, huh?" He laughed softly, and it wasn't forced or awkward. It felt natural, like he was happy for the company. "Yeah," he said. "Wasn't planning on a swim today, though." We both chuckled, and suddenly the rain didn't feel as miserable anymore. The storefront was an old bookstore, one of those places where the windows are fogged up, and you can see the shelves packed tight with books that probably hadn't been touched in years. It smelled like damp paper and history. Somehow, it felt like the perfect background for a random meeting. I introduced myself, Jake, and he told me his name was Owen. Just like that, amid the dripping rain and the dim light from the street lamps, we started talking. At first, it was small stuff. The weather, work, how ridiculous it was that we had no umbrellas. But there was an ease in the way he listened, and the way he spoke, like he wasn't just waiting for me to stop talking, but actually wanted to hear what I had to say. I glanced down the street, still pouring rain, and said, "I guess we're both stuck here for a while." Owen shrugged. "Could be worse. Could be stuck with worse company," I smirked. "Good thing I'm not that." He smiled back, and I swear the world outside that little awning paused for a moment. The rain kept falling, but somehow, standing there with him, it felt like maybe the storm wasn't the worst thing about the day after all. We didn't know it yet, but that rainstorm wasn't just a break in the weather. It was the start of something neither of us expected. And honestly, I wasn't ready for how much it would change everything. We stood there for a few minutes, the rain still drumming against the awning, neither of us in a particular rush to leave. Honestly, I was kind of enjoying the break. From the storm, from the day, from whatever else was hanging around in my head. Owen seemed to be that rare kind of person you don't meet every day. Easy to talk to, but also quiet enough to make you want to fill the silence without feeling pressured. "So what brings you out on a night like this?" I asked. Curious, but not trying too hard. He shrugged again, this time with a little more weight behind it. "Just needed a walk, clear my head a bit. Things have been complicated lately." I nodded, because, yeah, I knew that feeling all too well. "Same. Sometimes you just gotta get out and not think about it." He looked at me, and for a second, I thought he was gonna say more, but he just smiled quietly and said, "Yeah." The rain didn't seem to want to stop, and the streetlights cast these long, blurry reflections on the wet asphalt. I was kind of hoping the storm would last a bit longer, because I wanted to keep talking to him. Silly maybe, but there's something about sharing a quiet moment with someone when the rest of the world is just noise and chaos. After a moment, Owen glanced toward the bookstore window and said, "You want to come inside? I think it's open." I blinked. The whole time I'd assumed the store was closed. The door was cracked open just enough to let some warmth out. Warmth that smelled like old books and something faintly sweet, like vanilla or cinnamon. I nodded, a little surprised at myself, but also kind of glad for the invitation. "Yeah, sure." We ducked inside just as a big gust of wind sent a fresh wave of rain down the street. The warmth hit me immediately. It was cozy in there, but not the warm, modern kind of cozy. It was the kind of place where you could get lost for hours, the kind of cozy that felt like stepping into a secret. Owen wandered over to a shelf stacked with dog-eared paperbacks and pulled one out. Ever read this? He asked, holding up a copy of some obscure novel I'd never heard of. Can't say that I have, I admitted, glancing around. I am more of a sci-fi guy, but I'm open to suggestions. He grinned, the kind of grin that made his eyes light up. Maybe I'll lend it to you sometime. The idea of lending books felt intimate in a way I didn't expect. It wasn't like texting or swiping right on a dating app. This was something slower, more meaningful. We found a little nook near the back where the light was softer, and we leaned against the shelves, talking about everything and nothing. Work, bad dates, childhood memories, favorite bands. Owen told me about how he'd been a music teacher before switching careers to something a little less stressful, and I told him about my own messy attempts to figure out what I really wanted out of life. Somewhere between a story about a terrible blind date and a shared laugh over a ridiculous song lyric, I realized I hadn't once checked my phone. Forgotten it was even dead in my pocket. Time slipped by without us noticing. At one point, Owen looked over at me, his expression softer, and said, "You don't get many nights like this, do you?" I shook my head. "Not really." He smiled again, and it wasn't the polite smile from earlier. It was warmer, a little shy maybe, but genuine. "I'm glad the storm made you stop," he said quietly. I felt my chest tighten a bit, like an unexpected warmth spreading where I hadn't expected it. "Me too," I said, and meant it. The rain finally slowed to a gentle mist, and I glanced outside. The street was slick and shining, but the thunder had moved on, leaving a kind of quiet calm in its wake. Neither of us moved immediately. It felt like stepping back out into the world would break something fragile but important. Finally, Owen sighed and said, "Well, I guess we should probably go before they lock up the store." I laughed softly. "Yeah, wouldn't want to get kicked out." We walked back toward the door, and just before stepping outside, Owen turned to me and said, "Hey, maybe I could grab coffee with you sometime?" Not because of the storm, but because it turned out to be a pretty good night. I blinked, surprised but thrilled. "I'd like that." He smiled, and I felt like maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something a lot better than either of us expected when we first ducked under that awning. As we stepped into the cool, fresh air after the storm, I realized sometimes the worst weather leads to the best moments. I just hadn't known I'd find someone worth waiting out the storm with. We stepped out of the bookstore together, the scent of wet pavement lingering in the air. That clean smell you get after a rainstorm. The street was still damp and shiny, the traffic slowed down, and the usual noise felt oddly muted. I realized I didn't want the night to end just yet. "So coffee?" I asked, already knowing the answer but still wanting to hear him say it. Owen nodded, tucking his hands into the pockets of his jacket. "Yeah, there's a place a few blocks down that's open late. Cozy, not too loud." "Perfect," I said, feeling a little thrill of anticipation I hadn't felt in a while. We walked side by side, not saying much at first, just savoring the quiet and the way the city looked different after a storm. The streetlights cast long pools of light across the sidewalks, and the air was cool but refreshing. When we reached the coffee shop, a small, dimly lit spot with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls, it felt like a good fit. We grabbed a table in the corner where the light was soft and ordered, oversteaming mugs of coffee, black for me, cappuccino for him. We started peeling back layers. I found out Owen had moved here from another state a couple of years ago, chasing something he couldn't quite put into words. I told him about my own restless streak, how I'd been bouncing between jobs and cities, always looking for a place that felt like home. There was something about the way he listened that made me want to confess more. The small failures, the hopes I'd shoved down because they felt too fragile. And the more I talked, the more I realized he was doing the same, sharing the cracks in his armor without even realizing it. At one point, he reached across the table and brushed a stray lock of hair from my forehead. It was such a small gesture, but it made my heart skip. I caught his eyes, and there was a softness there that made everything else fade away. "Jake," he said quietly, "I'm really glad we met tonight." "Me too," I answered, my voice a little breathless. We talked until the coffee cooled and the shop began to empty out. Neither of us wanted to be the one to say goodbye. When we finally stepped back onto the street, the night had turned colder, and the city felt even quieter than before. "I don't want this to be a one-time thing," Owen said as we walked slowly back toward the train station. "Yeah," I agreed. "Neither do I." We exchanged numbers, the act feeling both old-fashioned and exciting. I watched him disappear into the crowd at the station, feeling strangely hopeful. Over the next few weeks, we met often, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for long walks that stretched into the night. Each time, I learned more about him and more about myself. We talked about our dreams, our fears, the people we'd been, and the people we wanted to be. One night, after a late dinner at a dive bar neither of us had been to before, we found ourselves sitting on a bench overlooking the river. The city lights shimmered on the water, and the cool breeze felt like a reset button. Owen turned to me, his face serious but open. "I know this is fast, but I think I'm falling for you." My chest tightened, and I swallowed hard. "I think I'm falling for you too." He smiled and then leaned in, our lips meeting softly under the night sky. It wasn't perfect or polished. It was real and messy and exactly what I hadn't known I was waiting for. As we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine and whispered, "Thank you for standing with me in that storm." I laughed softly. I think we both found shelter. Sometimes life throws a storm your way, and you just want to wait it out. But sometimes, if you're lucky, you find someone who makes the storm worth it. Someone who turns a bad day into the beginning of something beautiful. And that's exactly what happened to me. After that night by the river, things between Owen and me started to feel different. More real, more fragile, in a way I hadn't expected. It's funny how, when you start feeling something new and important, you suddenly notice all the little uncertainties bubbling just beneath the surface. Like, are you moving too fast? Are they really into this, or is it just me? Am I ready for whatever this is? We kept seeing each other regularly, but I noticed Owen sometimes pulling back subtly, like he was holding something back. One evening, a week or so after that kiss, we were sitting on my couch watching an old movie. One of those black and white things neither of us really cared for, but used as background noise. He was quiet, and I could feel the way his eyes kept flicking away from mine. I finally asked, "Hey, what's on your mind?" He hesitated, then sighed. "I guess I'm scared. Not of you, but of all this. Us. I haven't really done this before, you know? Letting someone in. That hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to reassure him, but I also wanted him to be honest, not just say what I wanted to hear. I get that, I admitted. I'm not exactly an expert either, but maybe we don't have to have it all figured out right now. He nodded slowly, and we sat there for a while, the movie forgotten. It was moments like that, the quiet, honest ones, that made me realize this wasn't just a fling or a fun distraction. It was something that mattered, something worth trying, even if it meant risk and uncertainty. A few days later, Owen invited me to his apartment for dinner. It was small, but warm, filled with books stacked here and there, a guitar resting in the corner. Cooking with him was unexpectedly fun. He was surprisingly good at making pasta from scratch, his hands steady and confident in a way that made me smile. The way he talked about the music he used to teach, the students he missed, even the awkward moments, gave me more insight into who he was beyond the surface. After dinner, we settled on the couch, the city lights glowing faintly through the window behind him. He reached out and took my hand in his, fingers intertwining naturally. "Jake," he said softly, "I don't want to be scared anymore. Not if it means missing out on something real." I looked into his eyes, feeling a swell of something I couldn't quite name but felt deep in my chest. "Neither do I." That night felt like a turning point. Not because we said something grand or made promises we couldn't keep, but because we made a choice to be vulnerable with each other, to take a chance. Over the next few weeks, the newness between us began to settle into something comfortable but exciting. We discovered favorite spots, little coffee shops, dimly lit bars where no one knew our names, parks where we could walk without a care. There were nights filled with laughter and mornings where we just lay tangled in each other's arms, talking about everything and nothing. Of course, it wasn't all perfect. Sometimes I caught Owen staring off into space, a little distant, and I knew there were things he wasn't ready to share yet. Sometimes I had my own doubts creeping in, especially when work got stressful or I felt like I was just fumbling through life. But something kept pulling us back together, like gravity. One afternoon, we decided to check out a local art exhibit. Neither of us were particularly artsy, but it felt like a good way to spend time together outside our usual routine. The gallery was quiet, sunlight streaming through tall windows, casting warm light on paintings and sculptures. We wandered through the rooms, occasionally stopping to comment or joke. At one point, Owen stopped in front of a painting that looked like a chaotic swirl of colors, bright reds and blues clashing and blending in a way that was both confusing and beautiful. "It's kinda like life, huh?" he said quietly. "Messy, unpredictable, but somehow it all comes together." I smiled, liking the honesty in that. "Yeah," I said, "and maybe you just have to trust the process." He looked at me then, that same softness in his eyes, and for a moment everything else faded away. As we left, hand in hand, I felt more certain than ever that this was something I wanted to hold on to, even when it got messy, even when it got hard. Weeks turned into months, and our relationship deepened, rooted in those little moments, the shared music playlists, lazy Sunday. Owen had a way of making me feel seen, really seen, in a way I hadn't experienced before. One night, after a particularly long day, we sat on the rooftop of his building, wrapped in blankets, staring at the city lights stretching out below us. "I'm glad that storm brought us together," Owen said, leaning his head on my shoulder. "Me too," I whispered. And as the night air cooled around us, I knew that sometimes the most unexpected moments, the storms, the chance encounters, led to the most meaningful connections. I didn't know what the future held, but with Owen by my side, I was ready. There was a comfort in that silence, in the way his head rested against my shoulder, casual but intimate all at once. I glanced over at him. His eyes were closed, face relaxed in a way that told me he trusted me without needing to say it. It made my chest tighten. This kind of connection was rare, and I was starting to realize how much I'd craved it without even knowing. "Hey," I whispered, barely moving. "What do you think about moving in together?" The words felt heavier than I expected. I wasn't sure if I was asking or telling, or maybe both. Owen opened his eyes slowly, looking at me with a mix of surprise and something else. "Hope, maybe?" "I've thought about it," he admitted. "But I wasn't sure you'd be ready." I laughed softly. "Well, I'm ready. I want to see if we can make this work. Really work." He smiled. That slow, genuine kind that reached his eyes and squeezed my hand. Me too. We didn't talk much after that. No grand plans or timelines, but the idea was there, lingering between us, like the city lights below. The next few weeks felt like a whirlwind of new routines. We started spending more nights at each other's places, learning whose toothbrush to use and which way the toothpaste cap went on. We debated over furniture arrangements and which walls to hang art on, his collection of vintage concert posters slowly taking over my living room. There was something thrilling about blending our lives in such small, everyday ways. Cooking dinner together, arguing over the thermostat setting, binge-watching cheesy TV shows while sharing a blanket. It was different from the excitement of new dating. It was deeper, steadier, but still with an undercurrent of something electric. But of course, nothing is without its bumps. One afternoon, Owen invited me to meet his family. I'd been nervous about it for weeks, trying to imagine what they'd be like, wondering how they'd react to him bringing a guy home. When the day arrived, I found myself pacing outside their house, rehearsing what to say, and worrying about every little thing. His mom answered the door with a warm smile that immediately eased some of my nerves. The house was cozy, filled with photos and the smell of fresh coffee. His dad was quieter but polite, and his younger sister was this lively ball of energy who immediately asked me a million questions. Throughout dinner, Owen and I sat close, fingers brushing under the table, stealing small smiles. It felt important to see where he came from, to share a part of myself with them too. On the drive home, Owen reached over and took my hand. "You did great," I smiled, feeling a little lighter than I had in days. "Thanks for trusting me with them." "Always," he said. But even as things felt good, I noticed Owen slipping back into those moments of quiet distance sometimes, the way he'd stare off in thought or check his phone a little too often, shutting down when I asked what was wrong. One night, After a late dinner, I finally pressed him gently. "Owen, what's going on? You've been distant," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's just work. They're restructuring, and I'm not sure how secure my job is. I hate feeling like I'm always waiting for the other shoe to drop." I reached out, placing my hand over his. "Hey, we're in this together. You don't have to carry it alone." He looked at me then, eyes searching, and I realized that despite all the progress we'd made, the past still cast a shadow, the kind of fear that makes you pull back before you get too close. "I'm scared," he admitted in a whisper. "Scared of losing everything, scared of messing this up." That hit me hard because I'd felt those same fears in my own way. "You won't lose me," I said firmly. "We'll figure it out, whatever comes." He nodded, leaning in to rest his forehead against mine. "Thank you, Jake. I don't know what I'd do without you." And honestly, I didn't know either. Those moments when we laid our fears bare were some of the hardest but also the most real. Love, I was learning, wasn't just the easy laughs or stolen kisses in the rain. It was the messy, uncertain stuff too. The late night talks about the future, the quiet support when life feels like it's falling apart. One Sunday afternoon, we found ourselves at the same bookstore where we'd first met, now almost like a little ritual. Browsing the shelves, Owen pulled out a worn poetry book and handed it to me. "Thought you might like this," he said. I flipped through it, smiling at the scribbled notes in the margins. "You're full of surprises." He shrugged, grinning. "Maybe you bring that out of me." We sat in the little nook again, just like the first time, but this time something felt different. We weren't strangers anymore, sheltering from a storm. We were partners, learning how to weather life's storms together. And as I looked at Owen, reading poetry in that quiet corner, I realized I wasn't just lucky to have found him in that rain. I was grateful for every moment since, the doubts, the fears, the laughter, and the love that kept growing between us. Because sometimes the best shelter isn't from the storm outside. It's the person who stands with you through it all. There's something about that little bookstore that always felt like a quiet refuge for us, like a place outside of time where the world's noise just faded away. It became our go-to spot whenever life felt overwhelming, or we just wanted to escape together. I don't think either of us planned on it becoming such a big part of our story, but it did. One chilly Saturday afternoon, we found ourselves there again. The sun was just starting to dip, casting a soft orange glow through the window panes, and the air had that crisp edge that makes you want to wrap yourself in a hoodie and sip something warm. Owen was thumbing through a collection of short stories while I scanned the poetry section, the place smelling faintly of aging paper and faint vanilla scent from the candles they burned near the counter. I heard him chuckle beside me and looked up to see him holding a book with a ridiculous title, a cheesy romance novel he'd picked up just to tease me. "Look at this," he said, waving it with a smirk. "Maybe we should read it out loud, for research." I laughed and shook my head. "You'd probably fall asleep halfway through." "Hey, I'd make it through if you read it," he countered, his eyes sparkling. I closed my book and stretched, feeling the warmth of the moment settle in. It's wild to think how far we've come since that stormy night." He nodded, a little smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, 1 minute we're strangers hiding from rain, and now, well, this." He gestured vaguely between us, and I felt that familiar flutter, an easy kind of happiness that felt fragile but real. We decided to take our books to the corner nook where the light was better. As we settled in, Owen looked up from his book and said, "Jake, can I tell you something? Something I haven't said out loud yet?" I put my book down and gave him my full attention. "Anything." He took a deep breath, the kind that felt like he was gathering courage from somewhere deep inside. "I've been thinking about what comes next for us." It was the first time I'd heard him say those words, next, without hesitation or fear. It made my heart beat a little faster. "I'm not just talking about moving in or dating," he continued. "I mean really building a life together. And honestly, it scares the hell out of me." I smiled gently, squeezing his hand. "Yeah, me too, but maybe it's okay to be scared. Maybe that just means it's worth it." He looked at me, eyes soft and serious. "I want to try. With you." I leaned in, brushing my forehead against his. "I want that too." After that, the air between us shifted. Lighter, more hopeful. A few days later, I found myself pacing nervously in my apartment. I'd been thinking about something important for a while now, and tonight felt like the right time. Owen was coming over for dinner, and I'd cooked a mess of his favorite dishes, hoping to show him how much he meant to me. When he arrived, his warm smile immediately eased my nerves. As we ate, I could tell he sensed there was something on my mind. So, I started, trying to sound casual. There's something I've been wanting to ask you. He raised an eyebrow, playful, but curious. Oh? I swallowed, heart pounding. I know this might be fast, but... Owen, would you want to move in with me? Like, really move in? His eyes widened just a little, and for a moment, I wondered if I'd misread everything. Then he smiled. A slow, genuine smile that melted away every doubt. I was hoping you'd say that, he said softly. Relief and excitement washed over me in a wave. Okay, so we do this? We do, he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. The next few weeks were a blur of boxes, late-night furniture assembling, and more takeout than either of us cared to admit. But every little step felt like we were building something solid, something real. One night, after we'd finally settled into a rhythm, I caught Owen staring out the window, quiet for once. I joined him, the city lights stretching below us like a sea of fireflies. Everything okay? I asked. He nodded, then hesitated. Sometimes I think about the future, and I get scared again, about whether we can handle it. I squeezed his shoulder. We don't have to know everything right now. We just have to keep trying. He looked at me then, and I saw gratitude shining in his eyes. Our relationship wasn't perfect. We had disagreements, moments of doubt, and days when life felt overwhelming. But we faced it all together. And that made all the difference. Looking back, I realized that storm, the one that forced us into that bookstore, that was just the start. The real journey was what came after. The late-night talks, the quiet support, the growing trust. Because sometimes, love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about finding someone who stands with you when the rain comes, and deciding to weather the storm together. Months passed, and what started as shelter from a storm became the foundation of something steady and true. Owen and I had settled into a rhythm that felt like home. Not perfect, but ours. We learned each other's little habits, the way he liked his coffee, how he needed a few quiet moments before talking about stuff that mattered. Me? I learned when to listen and when to just be there. One quiet Sunday afternoon, we found ourselves back at that bookstore again, the place where it all began. It was oddly comforting to be there, surrounded by familiar shelves and the scent of old paper, like a bookmark in our story. Owen pulled a small, worn book from a shelf and handed it to me without a word. I flipped through and found a note tucked inside, written in his neat handwriting, "For all the storms we'll weather together." I looked up at him, and his smile was soft but sure, like he knew this moment mattered as much as I did. I reached out and took his hand, feeling that familiar warmth spread through me. "I'm glad we found each other in the rain," I said quietly. He squeezed my hand back. "Me too, Jake. Me too." We stood there, hands entwined, surrounded by stories and memories, but most importantly, by the one we were writing ourselves. No grand declarations, no dramatic gestures, just two people who had chosen to be there for each other, come what may. Walking out into the afternoon sun, the city felt a little brighter, the future a little less uncertain. Because sometimes, the best kind of love is the one that grows quietly, steadily, like roots taking hold after a storm. And as we stepped forward together, I knew this was just the beginning of our own story, one I was ready to live, come rain or shine.